Welcome back, Hornets. We are ready for another Ready Workbook lesson today. We're going to be working on page 140. We're going to be doing part 4 of lesson 13A. So if you don't have your Ready Workbook out, take a minute to gather your materials and get ready to learn. Once again, we're on page 140. All right, so now that you have your materials out and you're ready to go, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is rewrite the title of my lesson up at the top of the workbook page. And the title of this lesson is Analyzing the Impact of Word Choice. Okay, so next I'm going to go ahead and break apart my title so I can figure out exactly what this lesson wants me to do. So I know analyzing involves breaking something down to take a closer look at it. So underneath analyzing, I'm going to write breakdown. And I know this word impact focuses on how something is affected or changed by another, or maybe even influenced. And this word choice, that phrase, I know anytime I'm dealing with word choice, I'm trying to figure out what the author means. Okay. And with word choice, we're going to be focusing on a few different types of language and devices that authors can use. The first thing we're going to focus on is our figurative language, which encompasses our metaphors, similes, personification, all of that good stuff. And we're also going to be talking about connotative language, which focuses on the feelings behind words or phrases. And we're also going to be looking at a few literary devices. Not as much on this one, but I want to go ahead and get us in the habit of writing this. Literary devices, or special effects authors use, so such as like imagery, idioms, things like that. And the last thing that we're really going to be focusing on for this lesson, that would be our sound devices. So we have really talked about three sound devices in this lesson: repetition, word repetition, assonance, and alliteration. And we'll go a little bit more in detail with that in a bit. So anytime we're talking about word choice, not only do we have to figure out what the author means, we also have to figure out tone and whether the tone of the text is positive, negative, or neutral. And then sometimes we have to break it down even further and decide if the word choice the author is using is strong or weak. Because we know we have strong words and we have weak words, and it just depends on what the author is trying to do to determine which ones they use. So now that we have broken apart our title, we know exactly what we're doing. Let's go ahead and look at our directions for part 4 to see what we have to do. So, our directions say to read the science fiction story. So, I already know that this story is going to be science fiction, and we've already taken source book notes on science fiction. So, this is something new for us. So, you know a little bit about it, but we'll take that a step further in just a second. We do know that this is a story. So, anything that's a story we know is fiction. So, story equals fiction because it's not real. So we're looking at a science fiction story, so something that's not real, and we're going to use the study buddy and the close reading to guide us as we read. So down below, it tells us the genre of this is science fiction. So you've already taken your source book notes on science fiction, so I'll only take a minute to go back to those and review those for just a second. So, our science fiction notes tell us that science fiction is a type of literature that explores the possible impart of a scientific theory or technological advancements of humans or certain societies. So, it has to do with very scientific things, scientific theory, or humans or societies being advanced in some way. So most of the time, science fiction stories are going to be set in a different time period or a different place. A lot of the times, that place is going to be maybe space or somewhere far off that we are not familiar with, and the time period is usually going to be set in the future. Most of the time, science fiction does not happen in present day. It can, but it's often going to be set in the future. So, science fiction stories can be based on reality or certain or current scientific theories, as well as outlandish speculations about the future of humans and their society. So it can be about things that we suspect might happen in the future. So something that's a little bit real slightly realistic, but not really. Or it could be like these outlandish fantasies that it's just hard to believe that it would happen. So they all have settings, events, and characters that might be fantastic in some respects, but are believable and familiar in others. So just like any type of fiction, any type of story, a science fiction story is going to have certain story elements. It'll have characters, setting, conflict, plot, resolution. It'll have all of those things. So some aspects of those can be believable and familiar, but some may have more fantastical elements that are a little hard to believe. So some of our examples of science fiction texts would be like The Hunger Games and Divergent. Both of those are good examples of science fiction dystopian novels. So dystopian novels, dystopian means that it's set in the future, but it's not a good future, right? Dystopian means that something bad is happening. And Star Wars and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea would also be um, some examples of movies that are science fiction as well. So let's take it back to our Ready Workbook page and work on moving it along here. So, we've already discussed some aspects about science fiction. We know that science fiction is, in fact, fiction. It's not real. So, we just discussed a few things about that. So, we are almost ready to read our science fiction story that this workbook page has going for us. So, before we do that, I need to take a look at the title of this story. And the title of my story is The Tribe of Wayward Clones. So, Tribe of Wayward Clone, and it's by Annika Peterson. So, the first thing that you must do with any story or any novel, anything that you're looking at, is break apart the title, um, so you can kind of get an idea of what you're going to be reading about. So, the first word of our title is tribe. So, when I think about this word tribe, I usually think about like a large group of people. Um, Usually Native Americans come to mind because they group themselves in certain tribes, but typically a tribe is a large group of people that are working together to do something. Next, I have this word wayward. So, wayward means that something is difficult to control or to predict. So, I've got a tribe of wayward clones, and I know that they must be difficult to control or predict in some way. And then my last word is clones. And we know if something is a clone, it's identical, usually, to something else. And usually there's more than one. So we know it's clones, it's plural. So our title is Tribe of the Wayward Clones. So now that I have broken apart my title, I'm going to go ahead and circle my paragraph numbers. That way they're easy for me to notice. And in this story, I just have 4 paragraphs to look at, so that's not unreasonable. We've looked at things that are way longer. So, our directions tell me that as I am reading, I have to look back at this study buddy and I have to think about what the study buddy is telling me. So, the study buddy says, as I read, I'm going to think about the author's choice of words and phrases and how that impacts the meaning and the tone of the story. So, all of these word choice, the author's word choice and the phrases and words that they decide to use are all going to work together to create unity in the text. And the unity that we're focused on right now is the unity of meaning and tone in the story. So as we read this, I just want this study buddy saying to be lingering in the back of your mind. I just want you to think about the author's word choice and how their word choice is going to impact or affect the meaning and the tone of the story. So the first thing we're going to do, guys, we're going to read this together once, and we're going to just think about what the study buddy's telling us. And then we'll come back and do our close readings next. So I'll read the story to you, and then we're going to go back and do our close reading and look for specific things to analyze. All right, so here we go. Tribe of the Wayward Clones by Annika Peterson. For a long time, every day seemed the same to me. The same bland, happy thoughts, the same activities at school, work, the dormitory, the same people. Oh, definitely the same people. And I don't just mean familiar faces. I mean people who are biologically the same, who are identical. In a word, people who are clones like me, Langston 57. 99 out of the 100 citizens around me are clones. The rest, the 1%, are naturals, or human born from actual mothers, born to rule the rest of us for some dark and dreadful purpose. A few months back, something happened to me. I realized I could only appear to function normally by pretending to be like the others. If I stood out, I knew I would be isolated and then reprogrammed to behave predictably, identically. If I stood out, I knew I would be at the end of the it would be the end of the individually evolving miraculous me. But what did I know? Today I stood out. Someone saw me through my self-conscious posing, and something unimaginable happened. After chemistry class, a young woman, Carrie 88, silently slipped me a handwritten note which read, I can see that you are the same as me. We are no longer like the others. Come to the basement, room L20, at midnight. So tonight, I descended blindly through the dark, deserted corridors until I saw a solitary silver sliver of soothing light beneath a distant door. I knocked hesitantly. The door opened on a room full of people, and then Carrie 88 stepped forward, smiled a real smile, and said, Langston, you came. We call ourselves the Tribe of Wayward Clones. We mean to escape from here as soon as possible. Okay, so that's our science fiction story. That is the Tribe of Wayward Clones. So now that we have read it once, we're going to go ahead and do our close reading box that's over to the side. We're going to do the first one first, and then we'll come back and get the other one. So our first close reading box tells us to underline examples of alliteration and assonance in the text. And as we do that, we have to think about the possible impact they have on the meaning and tone of the text. So we know that we're looking for alliteration. So I'm going to make myself a note down here. Alliteration focuses on our repetition of consonant sounds. And we're also focusing on assonance here, which is the repetition of certain vowel sounds in words. So both of those two things they're just both types of repetition. They're just focusing on sound repetition instead of word repetition. And both of those things are going to work together to create unity in meaning and tone. So what I mean by that is assonance and alliteration are going to work together to help us understand what the author's trying to get across with their meaning, so the idea they're trying to express, and also the feeling behind certain words and phrases. That will help us establish the tone for the text. So let's take a minute. We're going to go through the story, or you're going to go through the story rather, and you are going to look for specific examples of alliteration and assonance. And when you find those, you're going to underline them. So I want you to pause the video. I want you to go through the story, all 4 paragraphs on your own, and I want you to underline those examples of alliteration and assonance that you find. So the repetition of consonant and vowel sounds. So remember what you've learned about alliteration and assonance, and now it is time to practice. So go ahead and pause the video and come back when you're done, and we'll go over the answers together. Okay, guys, so I'm assuming that you are back. You have found your examples of alliteration and assonance. So now let's take a minute and we'll go ahead and go over a few examples that I found in the text. So we'll take this paragraph by paragraph. So in paragraph number 1, toward the end, I found an example, 2 examples of alliteration actually. So we have this phrase, rule the rest, and it has that repetition of the r sound at the beginning of the word. So rule the rest. And then we have another example in the same sentence, dark and dreadful, that d sound at the beginning of the word. That's our alliteration of the consonant sound that the letter D makes here. So both of those are examples of alliteration. We have another example of alliteration in paragraph number 2. And that would be, let's see. I'm going to try to switch these up and do them in different colors. Miraculous me. They both begin with the m sound, so miraculous me. We have that alliteration example there. In paragraph 3, we have this one. Someone saw. So someone saw is the repetition of that soft consonant sound. Also, self-conscious could be part of that too because it also has that sound at the beginning. So someone saw through my self-conscious posing and something unimaginable happened. So something actually would work for that too because it has that S sound at the beginning. Um and we have another one. A young woman, Carrie 88, silently slipped me a handwritten note. So silently slipped. That's an example of the soft S sound with our alliteration. In paragraph 4, I have another example. Dark deserted. Oops. So dark deserted here. The repetition of the duh sound at the beginning. And then also have solitary sliver of soothing light. So saw a solitary sliver of soothing light. All those S's at the beginning. It's kind of soothing sounding, right? So solitary sliver of soothing light. It kind of makes us feel calm right there. And then we have another example, distant door. Okay, so I think we have quite a few examples of alliteration going on here, the repetition of those consonant sounds. So now let's talk about our alliteration. Oh, not alliteration, we just did that. We're going to look for assonance next, that vowel sound. So out of the two, alliteration and assonance, assonance is a lot harder to find. It's a lot harder to pick up on in the text. So I don't have a ton of examples of assonance. Maybe you have some that I don't have, and that's okay if you do. If you do, I'd love for you to share them with me. So the first example I have of assonance would be in paragraph 2. In the phrase, I knew I would be isolated, that I sound, the long I sound. So if I stood out, I knew I would be isolated. That I sound is getting repeated over and over again right there. Also, in the phrase predictably, identically, that E sound at the end that the Y makes, that's our Y making that vowel sound. The E sound is getting repeated. And also in the phrase end of individually evolving, the E sound is being repeated with end and individually and evolving. So even though individually begins with an I, it still makes that same sound as the E is making there. So that is an example of assonance. And I think that was actually my last example. So I don't have a ton of assonants for you guys. Assonants out of the two is my least favorite to find. I'll just be honest with you on that. I can find alliteration all day. Assonance is a little trickier. So if you have some examples of assonants that I didn't find, good job. Give yourself a pat on the back. You're awesome. But we're going to go ahead and move on now to our next close reading box. So this one's going to be a little easier for us. So our close reading here says to circle words or phrases that are repeated. So we're looking for word repetition here. And we have to figure out, as we are looking for those, we have to figure out what impact they have on the story's meaning and tone. So we're trying to figure out, again, how word repetition works with everything else to establish meaning and tone. Okay. So, once again, I want you to go through all these paragraphs, 1 through 4, but this time I want you to look for examples of repeating words or phrases. So, word repetition. So, you're looking for words or phrases that keep getting repeated over and over. And this time, when you find those, I want you to circle them. So, we underlined alliteration and assonance. Now, we're going to circle examples of word repetition. So when you have those, you can come back to the video and we will check your answers with mine. So go ahead and work through that. As soon as you're done, you can come back and we will go through it together. All right, guys, so I'm assuming that you are back because you have found some good examples of word repetition for us and you are ready to check your answers. So in paragraph 1, we have this phrase, the same. Oh, I thought I changed my color. Give me 1 second. There we go. So we have this phrase that says the same, and that keeps getting repeated over and over again. So we have it says every day seemed the same to me. The same bland happy thoughts, the same activities, the same people, definitely the same people. And he doesn't just mean familiar faces, right? He is talking about people who are actually the same as him, people who are identical. So that phrase, the same, is repeated a total of 6 times. So we know because the author keeps repeating that over and over again, there's something important about that phrase, the same. So he keeps pointing out things that are the same for Langston 57 that he experiences in his everyday life. So every day is the exact same for him. He has the same happy thoughts. He does the same activities at school and work. He sees the same people over and over again. He doesn't get to see anyone new. And it's all because they are biologically the same. So everyone is biologically the same. Everyone is identical. So he is bringing emphasis. He is emphasizing the fact that Langston 57 is identical to everyone else. Everything he experiences in his day-to-day life is the same as everyone else's. He doesn't get to experience anything new. So another example of word repetition I found would be in paragraph 2. He uses this phrase, I stood out. So that gets repeated twice here. So it says, if I stood out, I knew I would be isolated and then reprogrammed to behave predictably identically. If I stood out, I knew it would be the end of the individually evolving miraculous me. So he repeats that phrase, I stood out, twice there. And then again in paragraph 3, he repeats it one more time. Oops, I didn't get it all. He says, but what did I know? Today I stood out. And he's talking about how somebody noticed that he was a little bit different from everyone else. So in paragraph 2, that phrase I stood out is getting repeated twice because the author's trying to help us understand that Langston is a little bit afraid of standing out because he knows that if he stands out, he's going to be isolated and reprogrammed to be predictable and identical to everyone else. He knows that if he stands out, he's not going to get to change anymore. He's not going to get to be himself. He will have to go back and be like everyone else. But you know what? He stood out, right? And so someone recognized that. So the repetition of that phrase, I stood out, is kind of showing us the evolution almost of Langston going from being, totally afraid of people recognizing him to someone recognizing that he's a little different, that he is more so conscious. So before we move on, um, we've done both of our close readings. I want us to take a minute and use this time to refresh on certain story elements. So we know that we're talking about the impact of word choice, but we're using a science fiction text, right? So a text that's fiction, and we know that any fictional text deals with certain story elements. So we're going to take a minute to identify the story elements of this passage and talk about what we need to know with them. So, on my other slideshow, I have a few things that are going to help us identify these story elements. So, in the passage, Tribe of the Wayward Clones, if my screen will load. All right, so we know that the genre of this text, The Tribe of the Wayward Clones, we know that this is science fiction, and because it's fiction, we know it's not real, right? It's fake. It's a story someone made up. And we know that the purpose of any fictional text is to entertain the reader. So that would be the purpose of this Tribe of the Wayward Clones. You guys have been doing the Pact for a while now, so hopefully it's ingrained in your mind that fiction means the purpose of it is to entertain. So fiction equals entertainment. This story is also told in chronological order. So chronological order would be your text structure. It's told from beginning to end. So it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Any kind of fictional text typically is going to be told in chronological order unless I tell you otherwise. So the setting of our story. So if you remember anything about science fiction, from your source book notes, you know that typically they're set sometime in the future in an area that we're not totally familiar with. So I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to assume that based on what I know about science fiction, this text, Tribe of the Wayward Clones, is also set sometime in the future, right? If they have clones, I know that in 2021, we don't have clones of each other just running about, right? And we don't have humans that control them totally, right? So I'm going to assume that the setting for this is sometime in the future. I don't know the exact location. This small excerpt doesn't really tell me that, but for now, just knowing that this is sometime in the future is good enough for the setting. So we know any fictional text must have characters. Characters help drive the story forward. If you don't have characters, you can't really have a story.